Good evening. Welcome to the world tonight. Apologies on the different time tonight because of good old daylight savings changes. Adam and I are on a 4-hour difference, not the 5. So life goes on. But anyway, to the things you folks pay to listen to, not really. That is the world's events, and we first go to Sierra Leone, which this week announced a historic press freedom liberalization law, which surprised many international observers. With this law being passed, before this, the press in Sierra Leone was very much prosecuted, harassed by either government or government-aligned supporters or militia groups. It should be noted Sierra Leone, of course, has had a very ugly history with the word violence and intimidation on the press, but it was passed just this week unanimously. Julius Mada signed it, and it was considered a symbolic moment in the country's history and really in the African hemisphere, as it has increased press freedoms in a part of the world that usually doesn't have a lot of press freedoms, if at all.
Yep. Just to add a little bit, so what the actual law does is it revises the country's 1965 Public Order Act to remove measures that criminalize publications deemed libelous or seditious. Mm-hmm. Now, as you know, with most authoritarian regimes, what seditious or libelous means is a very broad definition that is manipulated a lot to ensure that journalists are put into unfortunate positions purely due to the fact they may post something that is anti-government or something like that. However, there should be a further note to this, that reform is still needed, as the Independent Media Commission law, which basically gives the government basically a monopolistic role on media ownership, is still in place. It's still something that doesn't look like it's going to be going away for a very long time. And safety for journalists broadly isn't guaranteed. There are no provisions protecting them, say, from arrests made by the military or the police or whatever. These situations can still happen, and ensure that the situation for journalists isn't always the best. But yes, it is good for international observers to raise this and say this is a situation which is getting better, and it's good to see press laws being altered. But let's hope this isn't just a one minor change to try and appease some broad international opposition, and instead it is an actual change towards something positive for the future.
Absolutely, and it should, as Adam mentioned, the law still retain. And again, it's small baby steps. Obviously, the libel has now been reformed, but as mentioned, you have to continue these small processes of reform, and hopefully this leads to better things and continuation of the process. Staying in the African hemisphere, there was very animated and somewhat, considering who you asked, controversial elections in Tanzania. And Adam can explain that in the fun world of elections tonight.
Yes, so Tanzania went to the polls on the 28th of October to elect their president and also their parliament. The contest was between President John Magufuli, pronunciations aren't a thing here on the world tonight, who is of the CCM, a self-proclaimed social democratic party, against his right-wing opponent, Tunda Lissu, and his more, what's the party called? Chadema Party, CHADEMA Party, a lovely abbreviation there. So looking at the actual results themselves, the Electoral Commission of Tanzania said that the president took 84% of the vote, with Lissu on 13%. Now, Lissu himself has come out and said that this election has been marred with fraud, with other elements that make it incredibly unfair, not democratic. And the US Embassy has said that irregularities and the overwhelming margins of victory raise serious doubts about the credibility of the results. Now, prior to the election, another important aspect to look at is that 11 opposition protesters were shot by police in the semi-autonomous Zanzibar, as well as internet access was cut off. So looking at specifically opposition protesters being shot, this is the police and military intentionally trying to intimidate voters. You saw that they were positioned across the country next to election points where people would vote, and broadly, that has been claimed that has been cutting or has been intimidating voters. Furthermore, internet access being cut ensures that information can't flow freely, that kind of thing. But other elements to look at is that throughout the course of this election, opposition candidates have stood down to support Lesu, but again, that doesn't seem to have freed up any of the vote by the government. Furthermore, an interesting point to look at Lesu is that his opposition to the government isn't a new thing at all. He survived an assassination attempt in 2017, which the government, which many claim to have been an act done by the government. So, yeah, this is a very interesting character to look at because of his relation with the government and his opposition to it, and how the, I guess, establishment, whatever you want to call it, authorities have ensured that he hasn't been able to really push through with his movement. Furthermore, the ruling CCM party was able to win a supermajority, and at the time of counting, the opposition parties have won just 2 seats with leaders. This is a 393 member parliament, by the way, so just 2 seats for the opposition, with leaders of the opposition parties losing their current seats. But yeah, that's just the broadest overview of this election. And it's particularly interesting to look at because Tanzania has always been sort of seen as a beacon of stability in a very destabilized region. Looking at conflicts in nearby Rwanda, Uganda, looking towards Somalia, the broad general area hasn't been very stable, hasn't been very democratic as well. And the abnormality of these results threatens this stability that it has held for such a long time, primarily because voters don't like it when people make up results or at least undermine democratic legitimacy. So we've been seeing protests on the streets, and we'll see where they grow. But looking towards, and my final thing is just looking towards the future of what's going to be happening in Tanzania, is that the new supermajority in parliament will allow the president to extend the 2-term limit for his presidency, allowing him to serve for however long he imagined he wants to. However, that's purely just based on expectations and what members of parliament in Tanzania have been calling for. Who knows if this already authoritarian figure will engage in even further authoritarian acts? I would bet so. But yes, that is the overview of the election.
Indeed, very fine points. I only blind. I really can't top that. Excellent points. Yeah, these election results are very questionable, especially the fact that the last presidential election in 2015, the current president, John Magufuli, apologies again on names, only won 58% of the vote, and I have a high doubt that he won 80 some odd percent of the vote. Again, folks, this is.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, well, you just have to look at the democratic backsliding that has begun since he took his first term. For example, in his first year in office, he banned opposition political gatherings. Insane to think of in any form of a system where you think it's legitimate democracy. But yeah, I'll allow you to continue.
No, that's fine, and that mentions the point. This current president has become very authoritarian. Should be noted, of course, the great continent that is Africa. We have the very fun memes of presidents getting over 90%, claiming they have democratic mandates, which, you know, I have a better chance of being on Juventus than them actually telling the truth. But the point stands. But yeah, I think Adam's right. This is really majority will give him his basically presidente for life, which is very bad for the country, especially since Tanzania, as Adam mentioned as well, is a beacon of stability in a very unstable region. And they've been a very key country in getting other countries to the mediating table. So that getting into their own hot water or even authoritarianism is a very dangerous sign in a region that has been slowly, obviously not perfectly, but slowly taking baby steps towards the rights edges of democracy or just some sort of freedoms, going backwards. And hopefully the opposition, albeit small, can use their protests or whatever means necessary to ensure that the fairness of these results are actually put in place. And of course, banning internet and arresting people really doesn't really show a democratic mandate whatsoever.
My final point to add to this really is that you make a very fine point. We're talking about Tanzania acting as the person who brings people to the table. But as I was talking about earlier, the way that people have reacted on the streets shows that there is a chance of conflict rising again. But we should also note that despite being from a self-proclaimed centre-left social democratic party, the president is his response to COVID-19 has been incredibly lacking. For example, believing that praying will save you from it rather than any health measures. Furthermore, he's homophobic and is engaged in stigmatization and ensuring that gay people do not have equal rights in Tanzania, and broad things like that show that not only is the individual right to vote being threatened here, but further people's human rights really are being drained, as well as the autonomy of various zones, such as I was saying before, Zanzibar. The way in which they've overrun or engaged in fraud on the island there again shows that they're not respecting the democratic, traditions of the country. But that's all I have to add.
Yes, and I should note on COVID, as Hannah mentioned, he does believe that prayer will solve it, and they have not released any data about COVID since April. One of the very few countries in the world that has not released COVID data. Even China, for as liars as they may be, releases their data, even if the data is probably cooked. But anyway, folks, this is not for me to get the People's Party of China, the People's Party of China up my rear already. I have too many other people doing that for me already. Moving on to more fun and maybe good old topics, because this show loves good old school humor. We are now moving to the issue of Malaysia and its prime minister being in the very fun, arguably category of the comedic, man of the week. And I can explain a little reason why I said maybe use the word comedic to describe his week.
Yes, so just with, the background to this. So the current Malaysian government is still due to table its national budget for 2021. I believe the deadline is November 6th or sometime in early November. So if this doesn't align and this doesn't pass, this could trigger a snap election. Now, the main issue with holding an election, which has been seen by the government, is that it may cause a spike in COVID-19 cases on a country that is already suffering a little bit from the pandemic itself. So as a part of this, the Prime Minister requested from the King, who he has to go to declare a state of emergency, or they titled it an economic emergency. So what this means would be Parliament would be suspended. His government would be kept in power because a snap election would be prevented from happening. Furthermore, all vital decisions for the country are to be made by the Prime Minister with the advice of a National Security Council. So quite authoritarian measures, to say the least, to try and overcome this crisis. The main reason why Peter alluded to it being about possibly the loser of the week is the King rejected the request. So this desire for an overreach of power was seen by the King, who consulted it with state kings, and they came to the conclusion that overall it was not a measure needed. However, the King has gone on to say that those in Parliament should stop bickering, engaging in trying to politic the crisis itself. But yes, Peter, do you want to go in a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically everything Adam said. And I mean, it's very interesting seeing Malaysia's case. This Prime Minister, and again, butchering names is a thing on this show. Because, linguistics. Muhyiddin Yassin has only been on the job since March. His predecessor, of course, Mahathir bin Mohamad, who was the oldest world leader at the time of his dismissal, also, of course, was in some hot water for other comments this week that will be addressed later. Well, very much the Malaysian governments have run into issues of confidence with the monarchy, whether it be in the previous prime minister's case just personal relations, or in this current
Yeah.
case political, which is very interesting to see in this part of the world, because monarchs, the other comparison would be Thailand, and the Taiwanese monarch has, for the most part, been hands off. But this monarch, of course, has put himself very much at the center, Abdullah, Monarch Abdullah, of political decisions, and obviously has already told his PM if no, I'm not giving you an emergency, and that you need to work together. So it's a very interesting situation to see the monarch himself, step in and basically, tell, his politicians, I want something done now. And it should be noted, Malaysia is very authoritarian, of course, but in some aspects. But to see the monarch at least step in and ask for some mediation is very interesting to see in that part of the world.
Yeah, I would add that the actual questioning of Parliament itself by saying where they should stop politicking was a bit of a cause for some concern for some people, as they saw it as the king overreaching his position, whereas others have seen it as being within the role, the constitutional role of what the king has. But yeah, I think Malaysia is specifically interesting to look at because of the fact that the king does have a somewhat strong control, but nowhere near the same way that, say, the Thai monarch could possibly overstep those kinds of things. So there are provisions in place to prevent that kind of thing. But yeah, the future now will be the prime minister having to try and cobble together his allies. Specifically from the conservative UMNO, and try and get them to actually support his budget and ensure that there is a way of this being resolved, so a snap election doesn't have to take place, which it still could. We saw it's not the first time in 2020 that a snap election has nearly been triggered by a budget decision, as we saw in Israel a few months back. But yeah, definitely an interesting one to keep an eye on and see if it will go anywhere, because for now it's looking like it will mainly be behind closed doors as negotiations continue.
Indeed, and as mentioned, it's obviously getting that party to negotiate concessions, and whatever develops in that situation, we will keep you updated here at The World Tonight, as we always do. Moving on to a more sad note this week with the terror attacks in Nice, which killed 3 civilians and has led to very much a national conversation in France about secularism, with many alleging that multiculturalism has failed. And this is, of course, to President Macron, who's already had a very stressful week with COVID, to basically have to grieve a nation in another horrific terrorist attack. France had numerous this year, in the previous years, and he himself has started to open the question of what does France need to do to keep its secularism alive. And of course, this is, opening this question, is enraged Muslim leaders across the Middle East who believe the question, is Islamophobic. Of course, that is, an interpretational thing. I'd love to get Adam's thoughts first on the horrific tragedy and the politics of the multiculturalism / secularism.
Yeah, so of course, as you have stated, it is an absolute tragedy to see the extent to which some are willing to go out to express violence on those that have an alternative point of view, which ultimately they see as being entirely against their way of life. But just towards the politics of this, there are 2 elements that are very interesting to look at. First, you have to look at the way in which the French government in the past has really handled integration of Muslims within their own country, because I've seen many describe it as lacking, really. The French state has the responsibility to prevent people from getting so distanced and distrusting of the state, but ultimately they still don't feel a part of it. They still feel distant, and that obviously contributes to this element of radicalization, where people feel so separate from their way of life, but and decide in the end that everything is so against their values that they don't really feel as if they're a part of this country or a part of the society, really. So they engage in these acts of terror because they don't have any other way of expressing the frustration. And it's horrific to see that radicalization has been able to take so many people and for so many to feel so left out by their own government. But that's just my thoughts on the domestic situation of France, because there definitely is a number of measures that's going to have to be taken in the future to actually ensure that this sort of thing is prevented, because the situation of the status quo clearly isn't working for them. But just to talk about, I guess, the more broad international view, you're seeing leaders across the Islamic world either calling for a boycott of French products. For example, Erdogan of Turkey has been very, very vocal about his opposition to President Macron, specifically insulting the French in terms of their performance in World War II, towards questioning Macron's ability as a leader himself. It's very, very, I guess, questionable comments to see from a NATO ally, and definitely disrupting the already tense relations between NATO and Turkey. Previously, we had maritime rights in Greece, and now we're seeing this rift over secularism. Furthermore, you're seeing protests across some parts of the Islamic world, for example, in Bangladesh. And many leaders have claimed that France is deliberately attacking the Muslim world. Now, European leaders have united behind Macron. For example, Angela Merkel has said that they, this is quote, they are defamatory comments that are unacceptable, particularly against the backdrop of the horrific murder of the French teacher by an Islamist fanatic. So yeah, you're definitely seeing a rift here. Especially, this is going to be especially interesting for a number of different reasons. First, as I mentioned, Turkey, NATO. Another element is going to be Iran and the nuclear deal, which the UK, France, and Germany have been cobbling together, which probably isn't going to work now because of their reaction to the French. But yes, those are the two main interesting elements. But I do want to stress as a big point, besides this being a horrific attack it shouldn't be an element of anybody's life, really. Another thing you have to look at is the way that these leaders are manipulating their own poor domestic situation and trying to rile them up in favor of attacking this other. And then finally, these leaders, I cannot stress this enough, are hypocritical. You're seeing them attack France's reaction to terrorist attacks, but at the UN, on the international stage, they won't condemn genocide against Uyghur Muslims. Now, of course, I'm not saying this is the Muslim people. I'm saying this is their leaders, because ultimately, for example, in Pakistan, for example, in Turkey, in Iran, in Qatar, or wherever, you're not seeing this opposition to a very genuine threat, which they seem to ignore primarily because of the benefit it does for their own infrastructure, because of the Belt and Road Initiative. But yeah, that's its own question itself. But definitely a very, very difficult topic.
It's
because of how bad it is. No, of course. But
yeah, I think it's a very difficult topic. I think also, especially with the beheading of the French teacher, and this by Islamist terrorists, is really put Macron in a very tough situation domestically as well. And I don't like to, put politics into this, but it has to be mentioned. He is up for election in about almost 2 years, and his competitor, more than likely in the runoff again, will be Marine Le Pen. And it probably takes no one to guess what Marine Le Pen's views on Islam are, and likely that Macron is probably going to have to be pushed into a direction where, I don't want to say this, and we've already seen this, he's saying we need to reevaluate the relationship with Islam. Obviously, that could mean numerous things, but this probably does mean that Macron is trying to stop Le Pen taking that avenue from him and pushing the avenue and using it against him. So it's interesting in a political sense to see him, in one sense, embrace some of the things that in 2017 he didn't support. I mean, it was known that Macron was the social liberal on secularism, but now seems to be questioning. Of course, it could just be pure politics, probably is. But it is interesting to see in France's case a country that has really struggled now, really in the last decade. And I don't like to say this, but an identity crisis. It does feel like France has a real struggle inside of itself of where it is as a country, with its its ethnic minority Muslim population has felt that the leaders of the country have been pushing against them. Hence why the Middle Eastern leaders have gotten involved, which some of is somewhat hypocritical on their end, but that's, as Adam mentioned, a different venture. And also, the attacks. I mean, we had Charlie Hebdo, we had the terror attacks of 2015, if I recall correctly, the beheadings, the other Nice terrorist attack. It's just it's a very tough time for the French Republic in terms of what it has to do to solve this Islamist radical terror problem.
And as I said before, this definitely goes back to, I guess, years and years of inaction on the French government. Now, obviously, this isn't me saying that they are responsible for these attacks necessarily, but because they are disgusting and perpetrated by these individuals. But there is the element that they have left a lot of these people outside of French society by not integrating them properly. But yeah, that will definitely be a conversation France has to have with itself in the future. And I'm not entirely sure, since both in 2022, it's looking like Macron and Le Pen. I don't really think there's going to be too much diversity of thought, as both seem to take quite a right-wing approach to it.
Which is interesting. What would be if that is the case, and it's backed up by legislation, what the ultimate outcome of this comes out? Does France take a more hardline stance against terrorism in the sense that the US and UK took after 9/11, which was integration but also going after these groups, or do they try like a middle ground approach or more cultural things? So it's going to be very interesting to see what the French state does with this issue.
Yeah.
Moving on, just because we are a live show, news breaks in. We'll go to Poland next very shortly, but since this came the lovely world that is the internet, we felt that this is appropriate to mention. That the Times, the British newspaper, is reporting that the UK may be being sent into a second lockdown that is coming Wednesday. Of course, this is just a report from the Times, stating from their sources that the UK may be going back into a national lockdown. Germany and France, of course, have gone back into lockdown this week. And there has been, with European COVID cases going up, obviously this is just speculation, but we'll just have a few minutes on this topic. Adam, first reaction.
It's incredibly disheartening because for too many situations, the British government, now I'm going to get entirely political here because this is a situation that is a...
This is an opinion show.
Yeah, exactly. But it is very, very difficult to not look at what the British government does and go, it does everything almost a month late. Take, for example, the initial lockdown. It was a month late. Preparing a proper test and trace system, well, that was months late, nearly half a year late, really. This circuit breaker lockdown is looking to be longer than what was being proposed previously, because of the fact it's happening way too late. And I doubt for this situation it's going to have a proper test and trace system anyway, because there are so many different elements coming towards which see the British government failing to respond to the crisis head on, and instead sort of look away from it for a little bit and then have a reactionary take to try and pull it back. And ultimately, it's only going to hurt the British economy. It's going to hurt people's mental health as they have to stay indoors. And it's also going to hurt people's trust in the government, because, again, this is an incredibly contentious issue, which means people just reject the Conservatives. Polling is sort of starting to show maybe their leads are sliding a bit, as the Labour Party, I believe it was today, had their largest lead since 2018, as in they're on 42% with the Conservatives on 37%. Now, part of this is due to the fact of free school meals and a bunch of other issues that we could possibly talk about. But the real foundation for why they're slipping so much back from March is because of the fact people are slowly building up this distrust, which means that they're more capable of going, oh, I'll vote, or I'll look towards somewhere else for my vote. But yeah, that's just my broad initial reactions. I really, to be perfectly honest, don't want to be stuck indoors, especially because other governments have been competent, have been able to effectively deal with this situation in a way that isn't going to cripple the economy for years to come.
I'll just chime in. Obviously, I'm a Yankee, so I have to watch my tone. But I think Adam does a strike point. I mean, I will note I supported lockdowns when they first were a thing in March because I felt, I still do, that they were the right option and the best option left at the time. But I do not think, and folks, please do not send the hate mail, of course, that a second lockdown anywhere is the appropriate thing to do. I understand there's a health, keeping people safe. But at the same time, you can't destroy people's lives and the economy by locking them down, not letting them have any business at all. I mean, the food industry, the travel industry, the commerce industry, all across the world is decimated. And in Britain's case, a second lockdown, and in the case of Germany and France, will just decimate more industry and more small businesses. I mean, I don't know, obviously, where Adam lives or what, the restaurants there, but it's going to decimate local businesses. People can't stay, you can't operate a pub or a restaurant on takeout or like 25% capacity. It's just impossible. I mean, I do, of course, I don't support herd immunity, but I do think some of us we do need to have a frank conversation that there are other more appropriate ways of dealing with COVID without using the word lockdown. And
sorry, continue. I'll chime in afterwards.
Yeah, I'm about to finish, and then we'll move on to Poland, and you can chime in, and then we'll move on to Poland. I just think, again, we need to look really at what the East did. South Korea, yes, I know South Korea did some things that maybe wouldn't fly in the West, but they've beaten the crisis for the most part. I mean, the South Korean economy has taken a hit, but it's not taken a hit as much as other countries have. I mean, even Australia. I mean, they didn't have a strict lockdown. Okay, they had a semi-lockdown, but still, they've been able to slowly recover much more quickly than the West. We need to have a little more of a blunt conversation on what's appropriate in the age of COVID and what we need to live with now. Because, as noted, this virus is probably going to be with us till like 2022.
Yeah, so the final points I sort of add on to this is, while I agree, as you said, that a lockdown is entirely necessary for health measures, we could have had a circuit breaker lockdown for the 2 weeks if it was proposed earlier. And I imagine that broadly it could have been acceptable, although I understand that some people are against that as well. Anyway, I just think that this is taken to such an extent where they hold everything off until it seems to get so worse, and at the last minute, like, oh God, our strategy isn't working. We need to do something. And they do these reactionary measures. And
the local lockdowns were supposed to be the compromise on this.
Yeah, exactly.
That's flying out the window.
The final thing I'm going to say is that I love bringing up the way that Asia responded, specifically Taiwan and South Korea, because those responses, early lockdown, a proper way in ensuring that people were being tested and traced and so forth, an actual closing of the borders and whatever. But in the same way that some people say we should be following a Sweden model or whatever, we can't follow a Taiwanese model or a South Korean model because it's too late. This situation's gotten to the situation where it's so bad, where a Taiwanese model, South Korean model won't work. A Swedish model, in my opinion, isn't an acceptable model either. We're in this situation now where nobody is being able to properly come up with an idea that will effectively solve this crisis. And it's very disheartening to see that from the UK. But I think that's all from me in that case.
Indeed, and we now move to another issue in the European hot potato world, and that is Poland's new abortion laws. And that, of course, was a decision made this week from the Polish High Court that struck down most of the country's abortion procedures, and it basically leaves very few avenues for women to pursue abortions. Of course, the court referenced a abortion law currently on the books in the country up in the 90s for their decision of why they reduced it to very much, I believe, only if the woman's life if that is at risk, or rape, if I recall correctly. I can be corrected. But yeah, it's let off a firestorm of many who think these new restrictions are inappropriate. I'll let Adam go ahead and offer his thoughts and opinions.
Yes. So just to put something quickly there about what this new abortion law actually does. So prior to this, there were only 3 major exceptions that ensure that somebody in Poland would be able to get an abortion, of which I believe you're right. It's threat to woman's life. They are rape and incest. But this one was specifically that if the fetus had a severe defect. Now this ranges a lot in what it technically means, but in some cases, this is a situation where a woman's life could be at risk because of the defect within the baby, or even a situation where they still give birth, but the baby itself dies afterwards because of these defects. Now, the actual abortion laws that they currently have are a product of compromise when the country gained its independence. It was mainly between the Catholic Church and I guess the more liberal ruling class there, in which the Catholic Church wanted a complete ban, and then there was more liberal people who wanted it to be more expanded. So this was the compromise they came to. But as Peter said, yes, that it struck down one of these exceptional circumstances. The major thing to see why protests have been happening on a massive scale across Poland is that hospitals have been turning away women who seek them despite the court ruling not taking place yet. And this has caused many to go to the streets and demand their this law or this exceptional circumstance is overturned, so that they can go back to having abortions in these exceptional circumstances. Now, an element to look at here is not only the street protests, which has seen tens of thousands going to the streets across multiple cities, but also the way the government has responded. Now, it has been a very broad response, I say, because some have compared them to Nazis in their iconography they use. For example, a red lightning bolt, which is a significant stretch, to say the least. Some have also said they will charge organisers of the protests for causing a health risk, particularly because of the poor COVID-19 situation. So we're seeing that crop up again. And finally, they've stated they will defund universities and educational centres that support the protests. So looking at this has been coming from like the Speaker of the Parliament and other major people. However, the President Duda, has some sources say broken ranks and says that women should have a right to abortion in some cases. Now, the strategy behind this is a bit mixed, really, because some see it as being a way of them trying to quell the protest, saying, oh, look, somebody's on your side in government. But others have been saying it is more of a deflection tactic because the Deputy Prime Minister, who is essentially the person who they consider, like, I'm trying to think now what the word they use, but someone running the show basically has stated that the law won't be overturned.
Basically, the real, I don't want to say cut in, but basically the actual PM is just a puppet. The deputy is really the one running the puppet in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly, yeah, perfect. Thank you. But yeah, which is a weird thing to say in a country. But anyway, but yes, so they said they won't have it overturned. It's not up for discussion. But with the protests on the street, who knows how this will actually be taken down. We've seen before Poland's response can be quite heavy. For example, LGBT protests across the country, as in people supporting LGBT rights, were cracked down by the police. So this may be something we see here as well, especially because of the prevalence of COVID-19, which is basically spiraling out of control in the country. But yes, definitely something to keep an eye on, and we will continue to update as this protest has been going on for, I believe, 7 days now.
Yes.
So if it continues on, yep, we will make sure to report it and any further updates.
I will just add a very quick thing. I should note I don't really like talking about the issue of abortion, though I will add for context. I am who would be considered a pro-lifer. Obviously, this is very much a change. I mean, obviously Poland already had very strict abortion law on the books. I personally don't have really a strong opinion either way. I mean, the exceptions put in my opinion, are fine from a pro-life perspective. Of course, that's just my personal opinion. Of course, I don't think the third option that was struck down by the court should have been struck down, but I do think be interesting to see how Duda responds to this. I know Duda may not be a very popular man on the realms of the internet, but it's hugely very interesting to see when Duda decides to break ranks with pretty much his party here, the Justice Party, because he has done it sometimes. Or should be note the word "some" when it's probably convenient to do so. So, be interesting to see if he conveniently this time decides to break, or he just sticks to the line.
Specifically because I believe a poll showed that 59% of the country disagreed with the decision.
Yes.
And the Law and Justice Party has seen its, I guess, polling figures go down significantly since then. So yeah, there is definitely that element to look towards there, and that Duda is trying to save his own situation a little bit, because he was already in a precarious situation. But
barely won his runoff very narrowly, and it should be noted, of course, Duda's most famous veto was certain parts of the court packing agenda in the Polish assembly. So it'll be interesting to see if he decides to put another standing on that, as he likes to remind people he's an independent. Whoa.
Wow, yeah.
Whoa. Anyway, moving on the lovely words of independent, go to the firestorm, excuse me, my language, that was this week in the Labour Party. I feel like we're back in the good old days now. Labour having internal problems. Labour's anti-Semitism report, very much expected to be damning, was released on Thursday. And let's just say it was pretty bad for the party. And within moments of the report being released, Keir Starmer spoke and basically apologized for the party and its failings towards its Jewish members. Of course, one Jeremy Corbyn refused to acknowledge the report and was promptly suspended from the party, which I'm sure to certain members of the Labour right and the Labour moderates was a joy and something little too late. Of course, it should be noted Twitter, per usual, exploded for the right and wrong reasons. First thoughts, Adam.
Yes, so as you said, the Equality and Human Rights Commission says that Labour broke the law by failing to prevent, as they describe, acts of harassment and discrimination, and have also said that Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, as I quote here, did not do enough to prevent anti-Semitism, and at worst could be seen to accept it. Other elements to look at this is that there were overt situations where the leader of the opposition's office was disrupting certain cases that dealt with suspensions and so forth, and getting in the complaints process, getting involved in that, trying to make it a bit more politic to suit their own edge, really, on the anti-Semitism situation within the Labour Party. Now, I do want to highlight this comment from Jeremy Corbyn in his statement after it had been released, in which he says, "One anti-Semite is one too many. But the scale of the problem was also dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents inside and outside the party, as well as by much of the media. That combination hurt Jewish people and must never be repeated." Now, I highlight this one specifically because it blames not only the media, but seems to act like this is hurting Jewish people. Now, this is interesting because 89% of Jewish people, according to a single poll, of course, but think Corbyn is an anti-Semite. And this is an incredible statistic, especially because you will see a variety of people try and walk over the words of Jewish people and instead try to assert what they think is right and so forth. But in this case of discrimination, it is very difficult to not see how Corbyn has sort of created this own situation. He's grown this seed of anti-Semitism and hasn't tried to get rid of it. And his suspension specifically will be interesting because it may be overturned, but there is also the other element where it may not. And if he does stay outside of the Labour Party, there is also the interesting element to look at as what happens to the more left-wing MPs. They call themselves the Socialist Campaign Group. And their reaction has been something else. Some have threatened to leave the party if this situation spirals out of hand. Unite the Union, which is a trade union in the UK, is threatening to pull funding out of Labour. So you're definitely seeing the left wing reacting very aggressively to the loss of Jeremy Corbyn. And now I do like to get political here, but a fascinating point to see is that in all of the statements from a variety of different Socialist Campaign Group MPs, they have liked to state that they care about Jewish, they like to ensure that Jewish people aren't discriminated against and ensure that other people aren't discriminated against. A bit interesting from people who were complaining about all lives matter, but what are you going to do with that? Apparently, that doesn't apply to religious discrimination. But yes, it's definitely going to be an interesting case to see what happens to the Labour Party. Are they going to have a reverse Change UK situation where all of the more socialist MPs decide to split off and form whatever that would look like? Possibly a bit like the Respect Party from the early 2000s. Who knows? But yeah, definitely an interesting future for the
Like
UK.
by a friend of Jeremy Corbyn's, this should be
yes.
Holloway.
Interesting one there, but no, it will be. To be honest, let's see. Let's hope he's gone by 2024. But that's I don't want to get too much into that.
I will state, of course, for the record, I am Jewish, so this might be a little emotional and personal for me. I feel really sorry for a lot of what Labour Jews have to go through, and really the Jews in general for the United Kingdom. I mean, whether to get is fair or not, there were polls and polls during the election, the 2019 election, that said that for many Jews, if Jeremy Corbyn had won, they would have left the country, which is just damning to think. Now, I don't know if Jeremy Corbyn's an anti-Semite or not, and I don't think I'm in the power to say that. But there is no denying the fact that he is very weak on the issue, that he doesn't bluntly care about what Jews have had to go through. And it should be noted, yes, there have been many discriminations against many different groups in the world, but it should be noted the Jewish people have had very horrible situations. I mean, the Shoah, which is the Holocaust in Hebrew, and bluntly being kicked out of every country in the world, more or less. Very sad history. And in the sad case, the Labour Party basically left its own Jewish members out to rot. I mean, we saw Luciana Berger, gone, harassed out of her own party. So Ruth Schmeev, harassed at a Labour Party conference. They had to give armed police to a Jewish MP.
Yeah.
Disgraceful.
I think just to talk about Luciana Berger here, because I cannot stress enough how she stood in Finchley and Golders Green as an MP for the Liberal Democrats, and despite internal polling showing that Labour was losing the Red Wall and other significant seats that they shouldn't have been losing, they still put resources into a seat that was basically hopeless and ensured that to be honest, I mean, it depends on how you interpret it, but I definitely see it as almost an element of spite there, but not good at all, especially because of the situation she faced.
Spite. I mean, look, to be fair, that the seat Finchley is very Jewish, and in the end, many Jews, and I think it was the Jewish Chronicle had a story about this, that, yeah, I like Luciana, but unfortunately, I can't vote for her because I'm scared of them being Labour, of course. And many of them voted Tory because in their mind, that was the only way to keep themselves safe, which is just horrible for any political group to have to go to that decision-making. To think that if they vote one way, they may let someone in their mind who wants to decimate them. And it should be noted, of course, I'm not saying that Corbyn, was an anti-Semite, but he has had many instances where when he's had the ability to condemn it, as noted in the report, he refused, pushed back, or just basically pushed. It should be noted, of course, it's the same man who put a rift in Tanzania for those who killed Israeli Olympic athletes and tried to claim he didn't know what he was doing. Not
Yeah,
to get
I'd also like just to quickly add with that. This, Corbyn wasn't suspended because of the report and the findings of the report. He was suspended because of his statements. I think that's an incredibly important element that is sometimes missed out to look at. This is his own fault, and I do feel like there are elements internally within the Labour Party where Blairites or moderates or whatever will try and twist these situations for their own ends. It's the same with the way the Conservative Party has been handling this very tough example, very dark history for Labour, and trying to twist it into why people should vote for them and why Keir Starmer is incompetent or whatever. But ultimately, that element is also being exemplified by the fact that it was purely Corbyn's fault, and that's just what I'd like to.
And I do think it is very telling. And look, I'm not very much a Keir Starmer's biggest fan, and he served for Corbyn, it should be doubted. So whether this is genuine or not, really, I don't think it is. But to his credit, he did suspend him for not agreeing with the report. But it's been almost shocking to see the amount of Labour MPs, including the deputy leader of the Labour Party, basically say, Jeremy's a nice guy. We love him. He just made one little mistake.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, look, I don't really like Angela Rayner for many other reasons, but to say that Jeremy Corbyn just has a small issue with anti-Semitism kind of is a problem in the sense of you're kind of just whitewashing the bigger issue at play here, which is when he became leader in 2015. And yes, I'm sure Labour had plenty of problems internally with its Jewish members being harassed. But it flourished like a wildfire under the 5 years he ran the organization.
But I think that's all I have to say on the issue. Very, very dark bit of British political history, really.
And I say, just mentioning Luciana Berger, she should be sent to the House of Lords.
That's certainly an idea. I like that.
It wins for everyone. It pisses off the Corbynistas, and the Lib Dems get a seat in the Lords. Win-win.
I think
the more light stuff. We now move to everyone's favorite category of the week, and that is the loser of the week. And I'll let Adam go first.
Of course. Okay, so I've got a bit of an odd one this time. I'm going to nominate Paris's Roads as the loser of the week. Now, this does go back to COVID-19 and the fact that as the second French lockdown begins, there were traffic jams stretching a cumulative 430 miles in and around Paris, which is seeing people trying to for a variety of reasons, people want to leave the city, partly because they want to leave their cramped apartments to spend lockdown in, say, families' homes in the countryside. But yes, this isn't going to be great for pollution, obviously. But I do think just the scale. So I would recommend highly that people just look up photos or videos or whatever of the amount of cars trying to get out of Paris. It is just fascinating to watch. But yeah, that is my loser of the week.
Yeah, so my loser of the week, always a hard category when there's so many fun nominees, is a very surprising one. And it's from someone I really do like in Europe, and that's Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who this week set the country into confusion over giving two different answers on whether a lockdown was needed. His first answer was, yes, it should be on the table. His second answer was no, which of course led to panic buying and other panic kicking in because people thought a lockdown was on its way. Of course, it should be noted the Netherlands' COVID response has already been kind of a disaster. Face masks were not required up until last month. And the death rate has also been very bad. And Rutte, who faces a re-election bid next year, has not, unfortunately, done very well in the crisis. And mixed signaling, especially with COVID rates increasing and with the winter coming up, is not very good leadership from the Dutchmen.
Yep. Wow, COVID-19 really has, to be honest, looking back in March, as I often do, um, really is fascinating to see how much COVID-19 has just stuck around. And not only that, has been able to influence politics to this extent still. It is fascinating.
Yeah, and on the political sense, I mean, I'm not trying to get this, but it could very well COVID be the issue why on Tuesday President Donald Trump of the United States may lose re-election.
That is a fantastic segue to talk about
Mhm.
how The World Tonight is also a part of a platform. You may have heard of it, Elections Daily, and they will be covering the US election, and you should definitely come along, watch that. Peter, are you going to be speaking on that at all? Or
I have no idea yet. I did send my application in to be on part of the coverage. I don't know if I will or not. I will
that's
admit I
fair enough.
have a election watch party with a bunch of friends the same night, so I may be jumping around numerous locations.
That sounds very exciting. I myself have a few plans. Specifically, I have obviously watching it by myself, talking with friends, calling them about it as we watch the results. But also, I'll be on another live stream, dropping in and out, giving my thoughts on the race itself. And then also, I will be going on to a Welsh student radio in Cardiff, which I'm really looking forward to. Um, to share my thoughts to I'm sure the people of Wales who really don't want to hear me. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm sure next week
Yes.
maybe we won't entirely know who is the winner yet. Possibly, who knows? But if we do, we will definitely be talking about the implications of whoever wins. And the effect this will have on the world, because I'm sure that's going to be a very interesting topic to talk about. We'll be talking about the Middle East, Asia, Europe, wide variety of places.
Yes, exactly. I mean, not to attack my Commonwealth, that is Pennsylvania, but they've said they won't have most of the count in on election night, which is very bad for the state. So bad PA for screwing over a reputation in America and internationally. But hey, but no, to Adam's point, yes, we have a very good show coming up next week, really a special World Tonight, about what will happen in the next 4 years, whether under a Biden administration or a second Trump administration. What does it mean for Europe? Does the return of Trump mean more trouble? Does Joe Biden mean normalcy? In the Middle East, what happens? How does Joe Biden approach a region that, for many criticisms, Trump has done rather well in the negotiations with Israeli peace and other agreements? And what happens in Asia, the area where it seems that there's one of the few areas where presidential candidates agree on, and also Latin America, the area that all of that will be discussed next Friday at same time, not today, of course, not today's time, but our usual time. And for those, yes, please do watch Elections Daily's live stream on Tuesday night. It begins, I believe, at around 6 o'clock. What my understanding is. If it's not, then please check their website. And on that note, follow Elections Daily on Twitter for updates on races in America and also great articles to read. And for this site, just follow us on YouTube or Spotify, and you can listen to past episodes of me and Adam talking about fun issues of the day.
I do have one final question before we head off, but Peter, what would you recommend? Say we want to watch the results live. What news station would you recommend? Because I have no idea, to be honest. The BBC is awful at it, so I'm really looking at.
Oh, I mean, this is tough. I mean, I hate to say this, but really the best network in terms of coverage, I would say these two, and the one is probably surprised. I would say ABC is probably one of the better ones.
Okay.
And I would say also Fox News. Yeah, I know they're a right-leaning network, but they tend to do a good job in presenting their election coverage.
Yeah. And to be honest, maybe Pete Buttigieg will be on there, and I'm a particular fan because he's been doing the rounds on there for quite a bit. So
yeah, I mean, Pete Buttigieg might be Ambassador Pete Buttigieg or Secretary Buttigieg.
yeah,
depending
again. Other elements we will maybe get to talk about, really just expanding the scope. But thank you for those recommendations. I would, to be honest, I had no idea where to possibly look. But yeah, Sounds good.
Yes, indeed, and it should be noted because you mentioned the BBC. They've already announced who their host is going to be. It's going to be Andrew Neil's, I believe, last time on the BBC presenting something for them. So fun. Anyway, it's always a pleasure for all of you who join us and watch the show. From me, from the two nerds on this thing, separated by an ocean. Thank you, and have a great night.
Thank you. See ya.